night is starting to fall, and the hunters are heading back to camp with almost nothing to show for the day. The wind is getting stronger, slowly covering the tracks behind them. Up ahead, there's a fire burning at camp, the same fire their families are relying on for warmth, and it's starting to die down. There are no matches, no heated shelters, no emergency supplies, and if that fire goes out, morning is not guaranteed. Humans seem almost perfectly designed to fall in a world like this. We have no thick fur, no claws, and compared with many Ice Age animals, we are neither especially fast nor strong. Yet humans survived. They crossed frozen landscapes, endured brutal winters, and spread into places our bodies were never built to handle. So how did they do it? Fire seems like the obvious answer, but a fire could go out, a hunt could fail, a shelter could collapse. And sometimes, an entire landscape could stop providing enough food. No single invention saved us. The real reason humans survived was something far more powerful. And it may explain why we are still here when so many other Ice Age species are not. The Ice Age was not one endless winter. The planet moved through repeated cold and warm periods. Ice sheets expanded, retreated, and then expanded again. During the coldest part of the most recent glacial period, enormous sheets of ice covered much of northern Europe and North America, but not every part of the world was buried beneath a glacier. Across large areas of Eurasia stretched a cold, dry environment, sometimes called the Mammoth Steppe. It was an open world of grasses, herbs, and low-growing plants. Mammoths moved across it, so did horses, reindeer, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses. Despite the cold and dryness, some parts of this ecosystem supported surprisingly large populations of animals. To a group of humans watching a herd move across the horizon, the landscape might have appeared full of food, but that food never stayed in one place. Herds migrated, rivers froze, plants disappeared beneath snow, and storms changed familiar routes. And as the climate shifted, areas that had supported humans for generations could become nearly uninhabitable. During the last glacial period, roughly 27,000 to 19,000 years ago, expanding ice and worsening conditions caused human populations in parts of Europe to contract toward more survivable regions. Imagine being in one of those groups preparing to move. Someone gathers the stone tools, someone wraps a child in animal skin, someone checks the remaining food, and someone protects a collection of glowing embers that may be more valuable than almost anything else they possess. They cannot control the environment. All they can control is what they bring with them. Modern humans evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Our bodies were relatively slender. Our limbs were long. Our skin was mostly exposed. These features had not evolved for standing in freezing wind on an open northern plain. Other humans were physically better suited to the cold. Neanderthals generally had shorter limbs and broader, more compact bodies. That shape helped them retain heat. They controlled fire, made sophisticated tools, hunted large animals, and created clothing and shelter. Modern humans were not introducing intelligence into a continent occupied by primitive cave dwellers. They were entering a world in which Neanderthals had already been surviving difficult glacial conditions for hundreds of thousands of years. If Neanderthals were already expert Ice Age survivors, why did modern humans remain while Neanderthals eventually disappeared? The answer is not that one group understood fire and the other did not. Both did. And although fire was essential, it had a weakness. It could only protect the space immediately around it. Around a fire, the Ice Age would become a little less hostile. Food could be cooked, wet materials could be dried, dangerous animals could be kept at a distance, tools could be repaired after sunset, people could feel warmth, share food and information, rather than retreating into darkness. Definitive evidence of constructed hearths reaches back at least 790,000 years ago, long before the coldest period survived by our own species. Fire was not a last-minute Ice Age invention. It was an ancient technology. But imagine that small human group again. The hunters have returned, the flames are weakening. Someone adds another piece of wood, but fuel is limited. The fire offers warmth only while people remain beside it. It cannot follow a hunter across the plain. It cannot wrap itself around a child. And during a storm, keeping it alive might require constant attention. Humans sometimes transported glowing embers rather than starting every fire from nothing. But embers could die, fuel could become scarce, and a strong wind can turn warmth into danger. Fire was not the complete solution. The true breakthrough was learning how to trap its warmth. Humans needed to carry protection away from the hearth. They needed to manufacture something nature had not given them: a second skin. We do not know exactly when humans first began wearing clothing, and there's a simple reason for that. Clothing usually rots. Stone tools can survive for tens of thousands of years. Animal hides, plant fibers normally cannot. So much of the evidence has vanished, but the tools used to make clothing sometimes survive. Archaeologists have found scrapers that could have been used to clean animal hides, awls that could punch holes through leather, and later, carefully made needles with eyes for thread. A loose animal skin thrown over someone's shoulders could provide some warmth, but fitted clothing was a major step forward. A coat could cover the upper body, leggings could protect the legs, boots could separate feet from frozen ground, and layers of clothing could trap warm air close to the skin. That changed everything. A mammoth had to spend generations evolving a thick coat. Humans could make one. But the truly impressive part was not the needle itself. It was all the knowledge behind it. Someone had to know which hides worked best, how to remove the flesh, how to soften the skin, how to cut it without wasting material, how to turn sinew into thread, and how to make footwear that would not fall apart after a few days of walking. Imagine someone sitting beside the fire, repairing a small tear in a boot. It does not look dramatic. No one is fighting a mammoth. No one is escaping a predator. But that tiny repair could be the difference between reaching the next camp and developing a serious injury halfway there. Ice Age survival was often about solving small problems before they became deadly ones. Clothing allowed humans to leave the warmth of the fire, but even the best clothing could only do so much during a severe storm. People also needed somewhere to hide from the wind, and despite what we call them, many cavemen were not actually living in caves. Caves have become one of the most familiar images of prehistoric life, but caves were not available everywhere. And even when they were available, they were not always ideal. They could be damp, hard to heat, difficult to reach, or already occupied by animals. Most Ice Age groups had to create shelter wherever they happened to stop. Depending on the environment, they could build frames from wood or bone and cover them with hides. They could use hills, rocks, or natural dips in the ground to block the wind. Some shelters may have been partially dug into the earth. Entrances could be positioned away from the weather. Sleeping areas could be placed close to the fire. In parts of Eastern Europe, archaeologists have found structures made partly from large mammoth bones. Researchers still debate exactly what every one of these sites was used for, but they show that people were organizing complex living spaces in extremely cold places. And the goal was not to create a perfectly warm house. They only needed to create something warmer than the outside world. A hide wall blocked the wind, a fire raised the temperature. Clothing kept heat close to the body, and bedding separated people from the freezing ground. None of these solutions was perfect on its own, but together they created layers of protection. That was the pattern humans would keep using again and again. When one solution had a weakness, another solution helped cover it. But even a warm shelter could not keep people alive forever, because surviving the cold required energy, and that meant finding food. When we imagine Ice Age hunting, we usually picture the same thing. A group of hunters surrounds a mammoth. Spears are raised, the mammoth falls, and suddenly, the entire community has enough food for weeks. Large animals definitely mattered. A single animal could provide meat, fat, hides, bones, sinew, and ivory. Almost every part of it could be used. But hunting a mammoth was dangerous. It required planning, cooperation, and a huge amount of skill. One mistake could leave a hunter badly injured or dead. and there was no guarantee the hunt would succeed, so relying entirely on mammoths would have been a terrible strategy. The real Ice Age diet was much more flexible. People hunted reindeer, horses, bison, deer, and smaller animals. Some groups fished, some gathered shellfish, and when plants were available, people ate those too. People ate whatever their environment could reliably provide, because cold and hunger work together. The body needs energy to keep itself warm. As food becomes scarce, staying warm becomes harder. Fat was especially valuable because it provided a lot of energy in a small amount of food. Marrow, organs, and other parts of an animal could provide nutrients that lean muscle meat alone could not. So a failed hunt was not simply disappointing. It meant less fuel for the body, less energy to travel, less material for clothing and tools, and less food to share with children, older people, or anyone who was injured. Think back to the group during the intro. The hunters have returned with almost nothing. Maybe they found only a small animal. Maybe someone else located a fish. Maybe another member remembered where edible plants had grown during the previous season. The group survives not because the hunters always succeed. It survives because one failure does not automatically destroy the entire system. Humans use different tools to reach different foods. Stone blades could not butcher meat. Bones could become points or needles. Sinew could become bindings. Hides could become clothing or containers. A successful hunt did not only provide dinner, it supplied material for almost every part of life. But even the most flexible diet could fall if people stayed in the wrong place for too long. Sometimes the smartest survival decision was not finding a better way to remain, it was leaving. Humans did not survive the Ice Age by settling in one place and stubbornly refusing to move. They followed animals, returned to productive rivers, visited places where good stone could be collected, moved into sheltered valleys during harsh periods, and abandoned areas when food, water, or fuel became too difficult to find. This was not random wandering. It required an incredibly detailed understanding of the landscape. Where do animals cross the rivers? Which valleys are protected from the wind? Where can dry wood be found? Which path becomes dangerous after heavy snow? How long will remaining food last? To someone unfamiliar with the region, a frozen plain might look empty, but to someone who had traveled through it for years, it could be full of information, tracks, water sources, seasonal camps, dangerous areas, and routes followed by animals over generations. Now imagine the group packing again. The shelter they spent hours building is being dismantled or abandoned. Food is divided. The youngest children may have to be carried. The group cannot bring every tool or every hide because each object adds weight. But staying has become more dangerous than moving. During the coldest periods, humans withdrew from some northern regions and gathered in areas where the climate remained more manageable. This is important because it shows that humans did not always survive by enduring the worst possible conditions. Sometimes they survived by avoiding them. Their home was not necessarily one permanent structure. Home was the collection of skills, tools, stories, and relationships they carried with them. But movement also created a new problem. A small group could become isolated, and no group, no matter how experienced, could predict anything. A herd might suddenly change direction, a river might fail, a storm might destroy stored food, or the person who remembered a safe route might become injured. Humans needed backup plans, and the best backup plan was other people. Imagine trying to survive alone. You would have to track animals, hunt them, butcher them, carry the food, maintain a fire, build shelter, repair clothing, find water, watch for predators, and somehow take care of yourself if you become injured. Now imagine doing all of that while also caring for a child. It would be almost impossible. But in a group, those responsibilities could be shared. One person might be excellent at identifying tracks, another might know how to shape stone tools. Someone else could be repairing clothes, others could gather food, or keep the fire alive. Human survival was never the story of one heroic hunter doing everything alone. It was a network of people with different abilities. Food sharing made individual failure less dangerous. The most important Ice Age technology may not have been fire, clothing, or even the spear. It may have been the ability to help someone today and trust that the group would help you later. We also know now that prehistoric people survived major injuries and physical conditions that would have made independent survival extremely difficult. Someone had to bring them food, protect them, help them move, and give them time to recover. At first, that might seem like a burden on the group, but a person did not stop being valuable simply because they could no longer hunt. An injured hunter might still know where animals migrated. An older adult might understand how to predict weather or make tools. Someone who struggled to travel might still teach children or remember relationships with distant communities. A group that abandoned every injured or older member would also lose everything those people knew. And knowledge was different from every other resource. Food disappeared when it was eaten, wood disappeared when it burned, but knowledge could grow every time it was shared. A spear could break, fire could go out, but if several people understood how to replace them, the group could recover. That helped communities survive locally. But human relationships could stretch much further than one camp. A small community could not have access to every resource. Maybe one group lived near excellent stone for making tools, another had access to better hunting grounds, another knew a safer route through the mountains. Connections between communities allowed objects, people, and information to move across huge distances. Archaeologists have found stone tools, shells, and ornaments hundreds of kilometers away from the places where those materials originally came from. Sometimes one person may have traveled a long distance. In other cases, the object may have passed from one group to another. Either way, it shows that the Ice Age communities were not always isolated. They were connected, and these networks could carry much more than objects. They could carry information. A herd was moved east, a river has frozen early, a storm has destroyed a camp, there is a safer valley farther south. One group has food, another needs help. That kind of information could save lives. An isolated group had access to only the resources immediately around it. A connected group had access to a much larger human world. And this may help us understand something that otherwise seems strange. Why did people living in such a difficult environment spend time making beads, ornaments, carvings, music, and art? We may never know exactly what each one meant. Some may have been spiritual, some may have been marked by identity, but shared styles and symbols could also help people recognize connections. An ornament might show where someone came from. A tradition might reveal that two groups shared relatives or beliefs. A song or story or ritual might help people maintain relationships between those who do not live together every day. In a dangerous world, recognizing a potential ally could be almost as useful as recognizing an animal track. Culture was not separate from survival. It helped organize the relationships on which survival depended. And this brings us back to Neanderthals. Neanderthals were clearly capable Ice Age survivors. They endured difficult climates for hundreds of thousands of years. They used fire, made tools, hunted large animals, built shelters, and cared for members of their communities. So why did they disappear while modern humans remained? There is no simple answer. It was probably not one sudden storm, or one new weapon, or one dramatic battle between two kinds of humans. Neanderthals' populations were often small and spread out. That could make any crisis more dangerous. The loss of only a few adults might remove important knowledge, reduce the number of available partners, and make it harder for the group to recover. Changing climates may have placed additional pressure on them. Modern humans may have arrived with larger or more connected populations. Competition may have mattered, disease may have mattered, and interbreeding definitely occurred. Their disappearance was probably caused by several pressures building together. Modern humans may have found an advantage because their wider social networks made local disasters easier to survive. When one group lost people, resources or knowledge, connections with other groups could help fill the gap. But modern humans were not invincible either. Entire communities disappeared, populations collapsed, regions were abandoned. Survival was never guaranteed simply because someone belonged to our species. The real advantage was flexibility. Humans rarely depended on only one solution. A fire could go out, so humans made clothing. Clothing could tear, so they learned how to sew it and repair it. A shelter might have to be abandoned, so they carried the knowledge needed to build another. A hunt could fail, so they ate different foods and shared what they found. A landscape could become impossible to survive in, so they moved. And when one small group lost people, resources, knowledge, and relationships with others could help them recover. Every solution had a weakness. Humans survived by stacking those solutions together. The true unit of Ice Age survival was not the individual, it was the group and the larger network surrounding it. A person alone was vulnerable. A community could remember more. It could carry several skills at once. It could care for someone until they recovered. It could rebuild after a failed hunt. And it could teach children solutions discovered long before they were born. Humans were not protected from disaster. We were simply becoming very good at recovering from it. Humans did not survive the Ice Age because our bodies were naturally suited to it. We survived because we could create warmth where there was none, find new food when familiar sources disappeared, build shelter, and then leave it behind when we needed to move. Remember landscapes we could not control, and pass solutions from one person to another. A mammoth carried its protection on its body. Humans carried ours in knowledge. The clothing we wear, the homes we build, the meals we share, and the information passed from one generation to the next. Humans did not defeat the frozen world. We learned how to create a smaller, safer world inside it, and then we carried that world with us. That is how humans survived the Ice Age.